What if everything you thought you knew about royal silence was actually hiding something far more unsettling? Because behind polished smiles, controlled speeches, and perfectly staged appearances, whispers have been growing louder. Whispers that the royal family's most public mental health campaign may have been driven not just by compassion, but by something deeply personal, deeply painful, and possibly still unfolding behind palace doors. Because here's the part that doesn't get said out loud. This wasn't just advocacy. This wasn't just charity. This was urgency disguised as duty. And when you start connecting the dots, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. For years, Prince William and Princess Catherine have positioned themselves as the calm, composed faces of mental health awareness, speaking gently, smiling carefully, sharing just enough to appear open, but never enough to fully expose the truth. And yet, every now and then, something slips. A sentence, a pause, a look that lingers just a second too long. And that's where things start to feel different. Because if this was simply about helping others, why does so much of it feel like it's coming from a place of unresolved pain? Let's rewind. Prince William, the future king, the man raised to never break, never bend, never show weakness. And yet, he did. Not once, but repeatedly. He admitted something that shook the very foundation of royal tradition. He confessed that he spent years burying the trauma of losing Princess Diana, not processing it, not confronting it, just locking it away as if silence could erase it. But silence doesn't erase anything. It just waits. And then something happened. Something that changed everything. When Prince George was born, William didn't just become a father, he became a man forced to face everything he had been running from. Emotions came flooding back. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once. Overwhelming, uncontrolled, almost as if the past had been waiting for the perfect moment to return. And here's the chilling part. He admitted that no one in the palace prepared him for this. No one explained grief. No one guided him. No one helped him understand what he was feeling. A future king, left alone with something he didn't even have the language to describe. So ask yourself, what does that do to a person? Because suddenly, this isn't just a story about advocacy. It's a story about someone trying to fix in the world what was never fixed for them. And then there's Catherine, quiet, controlled, calculated, but never passive. Long before cameras started following her into classrooms and hospitals, she was already digging into something much deeper. Childhood trauma, emotional development, the hidden cracks that form early and quietly shape everything that comes after. She wasn't just showing up for appearances. She was studying, listening, observing patterns that most people never notice or choose to ignore. And what she found was unsettling. Children growing up without the emotional tools to survive their own feelings. Adults carrying invisible wounds they can't explain. A cycle repeating itself over and over again. So when William and Catherine came together to launch what the world would later see as a campaign, it wasn't just a campaign. It was personal. Deeply personal. Because when they introduced heads together in 2016, standing side by side with Prince Harry smiling for cameras, wearing matching blue headbands, it looked polished, coordinated, almost too perfect. But behind that image, there was something else. A sense of urgency. A feeling that this wasn't just about raising awareness, but about forcing a conversation that had been suppressed for generations. And the impact? Immediate. Almost explosive. After their BBC documentary appearance, mental health charities reported something they had never seen before. Record-breaking outreach. Phones ringing nonstop. People finally asking for help. Now pause for a second. Why did it take this moment? Why did it take royal voices trained to stay silent, for the public to finally feel safe enough to speak? Because maybe, just maybe, people recognize something real behind those carefully chosen words. Not perfection, not strength, but struggle. And that's where things start to shift from inspiring to deeply revealing, because campaigns like this don't grow that fast unless they're tapping into something already there, something buried, something waiting. And then came the expansion, the London Marathon. Thousands of runners wearing those same blue headbands. A sea of unity, a symbol of strength, but also, if you look closer, a symbol of something else, endurance. Because mental health isn't a sprint. It's not something you fix overnight. It's a marathon. Pain stretched over time, progress that feels invisible. And suddenly, the symbolism wasn't just clever. It was telling. Then, in 2019, the launch of the Shout text line. Simple, direct, quiet. Text one word. Reach someone instantly. No judgment, no exposure, no fear of being overheard. And that detail matters more than people realize. Because why create a system that avoids being overheard unless you understand how dangerous it can feel to speak out loud? And that's when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Everything they built reflects silence. Breaking silence. Avoiding silence. Surviving silence. And Catherine's work with children? Even more revealing. She keeps returning to the same idea, the first 5 years of life. The years where everything is formed. Identity, security, emotional stability. Why that focus? Why that intensity? Because those are the years where damage damage, if it happens, doesn't show immediately. It hides. And then one day, it doesn't. Her visits to schools, her involvement with mental health organizations, her push to equip teachers, not just therapists, with emotional tools, it all points to something bigger. A belief that intervention has to happen early, before silence turns into something permanent, before struggle becomes identity. And yet, despite all of this openness, something still feels controlled, carefully measured. Because while they speak about mental health, they never fully reveal what's happening behind palace walls. They show just enough truth to keep the world listening, but never enough to answer the question that keeps lingering underneath it all. What are they not saying? And why does it feel like the deeper story is still being kept just out of reach? And just when it seemed like the story couldn't get any more layered, it did. Because there's one name that completely changes the tone of everything you've just heard. Prince Harry, the missing piece, the unpredictable variable, the one who didn't just hint at the cracks, but walked straight through them, dragging the truth into the open whether the palace was ready or not. Because let's be honest, before everything fractured, before interviews, before distance, before silence turned into separation, Harry was right there at the center of it all, standing beside William and Catherine, smiling, speaking, building something that looked, on the surface, unified. But underneath, there were already signs that things weren't as aligned as they appeared. Harry wasn't subtle. He didn't carefully filter his words or wrap his truth in polished phrases. He spoke about therapy openly, about emotional breakdowns, about struggling in ways that didn't fit the royal script. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because when one person in a controlled environment starts speaking too honestly, it doesn't just create awareness, it creates tension. Harry admitted that meeting Meghan Markle forced him to confront parts of himself he had been avoiding for years, that without doing the internal work, he risked losing everything, including the person he loved. Now think about that. A royal prince saying he had to fix himself, or risk losing his future. That's not a casual statement. That's a crisis statement. And it raises a question that no one inside palace walls has ever directly answered. How much of what they were advocating publicly was actually happening privately? Because when Harry stepped back from royal duties in 2020, it wasn't just a career shift, it was a rupture, a visible, undeniable fracture in what had once been presented as a united front for mental health advocacy. And suddenly, everything people thought they understood started to feel incomplete. Because Meghan Markle didn't stay silent either. She spoke about reaching a breaking point, about feeling isolated, about experiencing a level of emotional distress so severe it couldn't be ignored anymore. And when those words hit the public, reactions were explosive. Support, doubt, division. But beneath all of that noise, one truth remained impossible to dismiss. Mental health struggles don't disappear just because you live in a palace. In fact, sometimes they get quieter, more controlled, more hidden. And that's where the narrative becomes almost unsettling. Because while Harry and Meghan took their story outside the palace, speaking freely, sometimes controversially, William and Catherine stayed inside, continuing their work, continuing their message, but maintaining that same careful control. Two paths, two approaches, one shared origin, and somewhere between those two paths lies a story no one has fully pieced together yet. Because let's look at the impact, not the image, not the speeches, the actual results. After their campaigns, mental health charities saw unprecedented engagement. The Charity Mind recorded its busiest day in 71 years. Think about that. Decades of work surpassed in a single moment of visibility. The Heads Up campaign brought mental health conversations into football culture, reaching nearly 8 million people. And not just awareness, action. Organizations signing declarations, systems changing. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when something hits a nerve, something real. Then there's the Shout text line. Thousands of crisis conversations, real people in real distress, reaching out in moments they might not have survived alone. Quiet messages, silent cries for help, answered. And if you step back for a second, the pattern becomes almost haunting. Everything they built revolves around one central idea. People are suffering in silence, and they're trying to stop that silence before it becomes something irreversible. But here's the twist that makes everything feel heavier. Because while they're changing the conversation for millions of people, we still don't know the full truth about what shaped that urgency in the first place. We see the results, we hear the stories they choose to share, but we don't see what happens behind closed doors. And maybe that's the point, because the royal family has always operated on a delicate balance, revealing just enough to stay relevant, but never enough to lose control. And yet, despite that control, change is happening. Referrals to mental health services for children and young people increased by over 150% between 2019 and 2025. That's not just awareness, that's a shift in behavior. A breaking of stigma. More people asking for help. More people admitting they're not okay. And strangely, that might be the most revealing part of all. Because if the biggest barrier to mental health support isn't access, or cost, or availability, but shame, then everything William, Catherine, and even Harry have done starts to make sense. They weren't just building programs. They were dismantling shame, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, and maybe, just maybe, that's why their story feels so different from every other royal narrative we've ever seen. Because it's not about perfection, it's about exposure. Controlled exposure, careful vulnerability, strategic honesty, enough to lead a movement, but never enough to fully expose the truth. And that leaves us with something that still lingers, something that doesn't quite settle even after everything we've uncovered. Because this story was never really about campaigns, or charities, or even mental health awareness. It's about something much deeper. It's about what happens when people raised to suppress everything finally start to speak, but only partially, only carefully, only within limits. And the question that refuses to disappear is this: if this is what they're willing to share with the world, then what are they still choosing to keep hidden? Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that are told, they're the ones you can feel.